He is a renowned teacher who groomed many CA students and author of taxation books. He served as the president of ICAI during 2006 and 7. He has served as a member of Appellate Authority of ICAI for disciplinary cases. He was part of Satyam Company revival team nominated by the government. He was member of the advisory board on bank frauds constituted by Central Vigilance Commission. He was conferred with Indian of the Year by CNN IBN in 2009. He is recipient of Padma Shri Award from the President of India in 2010. He is currently serving as the chairman of Canara Bank. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome CA T.N. Manoharan.
Chairman of the largest chapter of ICAI outside India, CA Nimesh Makwana, and his dedicated team of officers. Our distinguished President, CA Devaraj Reddy, distinguished Vice President, CA Nilesh Vikamsi, Chairman and Managing Committee members of the various other chapters of ICAI who are present here, our distinguished resource persons, Dr. D. Subbarao, former Governor of Reserve Bank of India, Dr. Prasanna Chandra, and other faculties, inspiring past chairman of Dubai branch who have built such a robust institution for over 33 years, and other beloved ladies and gentlemen. It gives me immense pleasure to be part of this 34th International Annual Conference of Dubai chapter and speak about global economy, opportunities and challenges. Visit to Dubai, like visit to any other chapter in this region, always gives me happiness for the simple reason that I am able to relate to, connect with, and meet with my erstwhile students who are settled in their respective places. It's always a matter of joy and privilege when we can trace back to the memories of the past. And my students have always conveyed their best wishes to me in whatever challenge that I've embarked upon in the last few decades, including the Satyam revival. And therefore, as my well-wishers, it's always my pleasure to keep meeting them on such occasions. And I'm here also as a recognized speaker only because of them. Because I still remember in the very first batch, after my class was over, one of the students came running to me and said, "Sir, you are greater than a mother." I was flabbergasted. But inquisitively I asked him on what count. He said, "A mother can put only one child to sleep at a time, but you have put hundreds of students to sleep." That constructive criticism emphasized on how I should become more articulative and how I should capture the attention of those who want to listen to me and how I should drive home the points which I want to navigate through. And that is how it all started, but here I am not going to achieve that objective. Ladies and gentlemen, we all can appreciate that as far as the global economy is concerned, though it is not country-specific topic, we have to necessarily deal with various regions, continents, and to some extent, nations as well. So this is the agenda which I propose to deal with. What the so-called opinion makers across the world have to say about the present juncture, and about the global economy, a brief perspective, because you should take stock of the immediate past, at least a few decades, as to what happened, and from here, where we are likely to go on, because past always helps us to build a future devoid of the deficiencies that we encountered, surmounting the challenges that we faced. And that's why even when we drive a car, we have the front window shield, we also have a rear view mirror. And both are essential for safe driving. And of course, the size defines how much importance we have to give to each one. And to that extent, we will capture the past. Then we will move on to consider 5 challenges, maybe non-economic issues, which the globe has to tackle to move forward. And in the emerging scenario, what is going to be the role of the 5 nations, BRICS economies, as we call them? Are they going to remain fragile, or will they emerge as strong economic powers in the world? And finally, within these competitive countries, how India's scope emerges, how it can shape up and build a future which is distinct from other nations. And we will conclude with a summing up. So with this agenda, let me take you through what the global leaders or opinion makers have to say. The founder and executive chairman of the World Economic Forum says, we are at the critical juncture. The global economy is at crossroads because there has never been a time of greater promise or greater peril. So the choice is given to the players to choose which way they want to proceed. So there are immense opportunities, provided you don't succumb to the challenges or the adverse situations that are likely to emerge on our way. Similarly, look at what the CEO of Accenture has to say. He is pointing out the impact of digitization, the digital world that is emerging, and making a sweep. Yesterday in another forum I was mentioning that it took telecom companies 20 years to reach a level of generating 20 billion messages per day. But WhatsApp took just 7 years to generate 42 billion messages per day in the current scenario. So that is the dominance that is happening. And the digital era is here to stay. And many companies have vanished from the Fortune 500 and may be replaced by those who are able to adapt to the scenario demanding the changes that are on the anvil. And look at what Yale University, Robert has to say. We cannot wait until there are massive dislocations in our society to prepare for the 4th industrial revolution. Revolution per se, what it signifies? It only signifies that things will dramatically change, drastically be different from what it was before, and for the good. It will bring a lot good, but in the process, it will also have its own side effects. Change is the order of the day, and the change sometimes may be incomprehensible till it occurs. I was just casually chatting at the lunch hour and pointing out, look at when you received an SMS message on your mobile phone, the sender would not have known when you read it. And you can always say after 5 hours of receiving it, reading it, that I just looked at your message. Same thing happens to missed call as well. But you cannot do that in WhatsApp. The dispatch is marked by a tick. The delivery is marked by another tick. And if you have opened it, it is colored. And so this is how and look at on the domestic front. 20 years ago, you will agree with me, ladies and gentlemen, for the smallest decision, if you have approached an housewife, she would have said, I need to consult my husband. Today, every husband says the same thing. I need to consult my wife. And change is, paradigm shift from the way it is, operating on a day-to-day basis. And that is the reality. So from that perspective, these opinion makers have to be taken very seriously. And let us take a look at, So let us take a look at the world GDP scenario, where we are in terms of the numbers, you can feel it as to how gloomy it is elsewhere except Asia. And Asia, excluding Japan, because Japan is 1.7, if we include that, the average will fall further. So 5.4% growth. And this is including the two dominant players, namely China and India. Of course, the prediction for the coming year, that is 16-17, for India is about 7.5% GDP growth, and for China it is only 6.9%. And therefore, Asia seems to be quite promising. What was this scenario, or what are the major events that shook the world economy in the last 30 years? If you take stock of that, you can remember in 86 to 89 scenario, where the global economy experienced unprecedented rise in the interest rates. And then came 91 to 93. Oil price, peaking at that point of time, primarily because it was Iraqi invasion of Kuwait. When Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, the oil price went up phenomenally. And then came the advent of the new century, when the dot-com companies got listed in stock exchanges, very, overvalued in terms of the pricing, and many of them got traded at premium rates, hoping that these are going to turn around and bring a lot of prosperity to the shareholders. And most of these companies hardly made any revenues on their financial statements, and the bottom lines of many of them were in the negative. But still, the price skyrocketed. And if you looked at even the Wall Street index for this tech shares in 2000, 10th March 2000, it reached the peak of 5,046. But just 2.5 years later, 9th of October 2002, it lost to the extent of 78%, came down to 1,114. So that depleted the entire market capitalization, which the shareholders were dreaming to reap the benefit. And then came the real estate collapse. Those who are in the financial sector may perceive this 2007-9 as global financial crisis predominantly, but the consequential effect was that even in the real estate front, what fell from that peak of 2004, 5, 6 was the real estate peak, and thereafter it is yet to see that kind of a rise. And even where market has stagnated, the pricing is not up to that old level. Now, having taken stock of that, let us take a look at these 5 top challenges. The first challenge, maybe different faculties or resource persons may point out different challenges, and economists may prioritize some other challenges, but with my limited experience and knowledge, I would like to project these 5 challenges for your consideration. The first challenge is the divergence in terms of the monetary policies among the major economies. And you would have read in papers, even our Reserve Bank, India's Reserve Bank Governor Rajan, repeatedly mentioning that it is high time that the federal government reduces the interest rates. The US have to reduce the interest rates. And of course, ultimately it happened recently after 7 years of stagnation. So world over, there is no synergy or synchronization. There is a divergent thinking. And what is good for one nation does not appear to be good for some other nation. Or what is good for developed economies may not suit the developing economies. But this discrimination or this differentiation has to slowly evaporate, should get diluted, where on a common platform basis what is good for the global economy as a whole, what is conducive in the long run, some kind of a give and take and some kind of a compromise for the larger interest of all the geographical players. So that kind of an approach to think in unison has to happen. 20 years ago, again, when one of my friends visited Europe and returned, I asked him, what's your experience? I still remember what he responded. He said, it was nice, but I found a lot of cultural differences, even within Europe. In Germany, everything is prohibited except those that are permitted. In England, everything is permitted except those that are prohibited. And in Russia, everything is prohibited, including those that are permitted. And in Italy, everything is permitted, including those that are prohibited, which means you can do anything and get away with it. That was the scenario then, and maybe culturally, ideologically, even now some of these differences continue to exist. But it should not in the emerging scenario, because what challenge affects one geographical segment or a continent is bound to migrate and attack the other segment or the nation as well. So therefore, a collaborative, calibrated effort to think in unison and plan with a foresight is what is called for. Then the second issue is about the increasing sovereign debt. That is, when there is all around debt, growing debt. Look at the economies. Of course, globally, 57 trillion increase has been there in the last 8 years. And the China, if you look at Chinese debt scenario in the same period, about 7 years, it has grown 4 times. From 7 trillion, it has become 28 trillion, which is 282% of their GDP. So with such large debt on one hand, but still trying to achieve the growth which is not the same as it was before. It was 2-digit growth that we witnessed for China in the past, but now it has declined hardly to 6%, 7% range. So therefore, that is going to be a challenge. And if you look at the breakup of what is this 57 trillion is made up of, the analysis indicates, though in terms of percentages, it might appear that 7.3% has come down to 5.3%. That is because the overall size of the economy has grown. But in terms of the figures, numbers, it has modified. But the primary increase is on the government debts. So the sovereign debts has phenomenally grown from 5.8% to 9.3%. So that is a major contributor. Whereas the borrowings by the financials, that is the banks and finance corporations, has come down from 9.4% to 2.9%. And similarly, personal loans also have come down, household borrowings. And the third issue I want to point out is in terms of the critical decision which the British government has to take on June 23rd. Whether they will continue to remain as part of the European Union or they will exit. I feel that will also, just as we experienced the impact of Chinese currency devaluation that was done in January, the impact of the Britain exiting European Union or continuing will have its own ramifications. Therefore, I am pointing out to this. If it exits European Union for its own reasons, there will be an economic uncertainty and there could be loss of many jobs, and it can impact on the GDP growth of the country. But on the other hand, if it continues in the referendum in favor of, being a member of European Union, those, who went out of Britain thinking that it may exit, may come back. It would reverse the immigration and it would save a lot of taxpayers billions, and the economy of Britain also can grow at least in the near future. And look at the scenario of those who migrated into UK just 1 year back, that is 2014, 624,000 people in that 1 year went in. Now, if Britain has to exit, then all their, stay, because they are no longer, Britain is no longer part of European Union, and they have all come from, mostly from European Union countries, their stay and the visa complications, all those things will occur or haunt this population. Now, issue 4 is the slumping oil prices. Of course, I need not say more about this because you are day in and day out debating about this and experiencing this. But all that I would like to point out is the economic outlook released by the IMF in April 2016. It says that Middle East oil exporting countries will experience a growth of 2.9% in 2016 as compared to 1.9% in 2015. Because though in this slide it talks of $44 per barrel in May, now it is $50 around. And GCC countries, it is expected that the growth will decline to 1.8% in 2016, whereas it was 3.3% in 2015. And IMF expects that the total fiscal deficit among oil exporting nations will reach 11.6% of the GDP in 2006. Now, this fall in oil prices has triggered the change in policy measures by these countries. And again, the study goes to reveal that there are 4 measures that are resorted to by these economies. The first one is the expenditure cut. But of course, some of these countries cannot afford to cut the capex. So their emphasis is on to cut the revenue expenditure. And the second one is the reduction in the subsidy on various fronts. And the third one is a measure which they want to take in terms of looking at initiatives to generate new sources of income, not exclusively depend on oil alone, but to generate new sources of revenue. And I'm given to understand that the GCC countries are looking at introducing VAT by January 2018. So as an revenue model. And the fourth one is some of these economies are even planning to privatize some of the state-owned enterprises to improve the efficiency, transparency, and also generate a good amount of revenue. And if you further look at the climate, fifth issue, the challenge, the climate change crisis, the natural resources which are getting depleted also involves a lot of mining operations, a lot of exploration operations, which all are maybe essential, but causing, a lot of accelerating the global warming up. And it is also leading to a scenario where, the nature is becoming unpredictable. Many lakes have dried down and disappeared as barren land. Of course, for those who recently experienced through their friends and or through the communications, the Chennai floods. When I was there, it was very common for people to comment that water has encroached into my house. But the real fact is that was originally the place meant for water storage, lakes. And if only water has the ability to respond, it would have said, you have encroached into my place. I'm only coming here to reoccupy. Nature actually doesn't need people. Actually, people need the nature. If that is forgotten and we exploit the nature beyond the limits or without taking precautionary measures, I'm sure the consequences could be this global warming going beyond tolerance levels, and also in terms of unpredictability, where we will be left high and dry without remedial measures. And when it comes to the pollution, the levels of pollution where many of the cities are not habitable as they were, this kind of a contribution made by automobile industries. This has become a big scandal, and that is why now slowly from financial reporting, we are moving to triple bottom line reporting. A scenario will emerge maybe a decade down the line. A lot of research has been done, a lot of experimentation is being done, and voluntarily many of the corporations are coming out with this triple bottom line reporting, that is on the social front, on environment, and on financial. All the three factors every corporate citizen has to report. Every business enterprise has to report as to what is their scoring, what is their rating, how they have not put the future generation at the risk of deteriorating all these things merely for the present profitability or exploiting the scenario. And in terms of the global change and the challenges, a lot of measures are being resorted to world over. The green automobile technology and electric battery operated automobiles are going to become popular. In fact, you would have read in the newspaper hardly 10 days ago, Delhi, the diesel cars registration is prohibited. And a case was filed challenging that decision of the government, and Delhi High Court dismissed that petition, saying, or rather not permitting the registration of diesel cars. So drastic measures are being contemplated, and therefore accordingly the industry players also have to change their business plans and emerge out where they can operate within the norms conducive to the global scenario. Now comes the role of the 5 nations, BRIC economies. While China is a dominant player and India is emerging as a dominant player, the other 3 are still make headway on many of the aspects. And therefore, the one prima facie disadvantage is all the 5 are not equal players. And another disadvantage that I look at is that they may not be able to supplement on all the areas, because if you look at the economic influence in Africa that is sought to be achieved by these nations, China, India, and Brazil are equally vying to achieve that. So they are competing to get the economic influence in Africa. And in military equipment markets, if you take a look at it, China, Russia, and Brazil are competing with each other. And in clothing, again, China, India, they are competing extensively. So there are areas where conflicts of interest are there, but still they are trying to find common ground to emerge out stronger. And if you take a look at the trade between these five economies, it's quite encouraging and growing. They constitute 17% of the world's total trade. So that is and in dollar terms, 11 billion was the number in 2014. Of course, they have diversity of cultures and lack of mutual economic interest, but nevertheless, it's good to see that a common development bank has been set up and a lot of progressive measures are being discussed. Now take a look at the biggest change that has happened in the Committee of Nations. Europe dominated with 39% of contribution in 1980 to the global GDP, whereas it has declined to 24% in 2014. Similarly, North America, 26% has come down to 20%. But on the contrary, Asia, which was contributing only 22%, has risen to 44%. So which means it has doubled its contribution to the global GDP. And that is the indicator for the future as well. And within Asia, if you look at the country's contribution or the share in the global GDP, China from 2.2% has gone to 16.6%. Of course, India from 2.8% only to 6.8%. Maybe the momentum is catching up, and the next 1 decade may be very critical in terms of our growth and where we could be. But only one aspect I want to make use of this opportunity and share. One dream, if I can say so, is that India should make a difference in its growth trajectory. Growth does not necessarily mean achieving the prosperity in terms of GDP and numbers. Growth should also imbibe within itself how effectively the country has preserved its rich tradition and cultural values. Because if you look at the Western worlds which have developed, as they progressed, alongside there has been destruction of institutions. Marriage as an institution, family as an institution, and the bondage between generations as a, the value system in the society. Recently, when I was flying in one sector, I happened to read the editorial in a magazine called The Week. And there, interestingly, a point was made. Every human being have to, however much advanced, have to retain respect for three things in life. One, respect for elders. Number two, respect for the books. Of course, books can be now replaced by any source of knowledge or wisdom or literature. And the third is respect for food. And when you disregard any of these three things as you go along, maybe in the material pursuit, materialistic progress that you aspire to achieve, it has its own perils, unknowingly affecting the human being. So, and ultimately, to put it differently, just as for individual human being we say, no achievement, no amount of achievement is worth accomplishing or acquiring at the cost of your health and happiness, isn't it? Ultimately, if it is at the cost of our health and happiness, why should we? Similarly, no nation can celebrate its progress or growth at the cost of cultural values and rich tradition. So if India can demonstrate that we stand apart from the rest of the world in evolving as a developed nation, but preserving our rich values and tradition, and that would be an ideal scenario. Even if it takes another 50 years for us to grow, another 100 years for us to grow, doesn't matter at all. Because when you have these conditionalities or principles, the growth may be little more longer than what could be achieved through a shortcut approach. Then, considering that the time is another 11 minutes more, next let me point out on the Chinese slump. So this is, what we have seen. We have seen how the past, the challenges happened, and presently what are the major issues, and world over how Asia is emerging stronger, and within that Asia, how a country which was perceived as a major player all along is now slumping. So China, when it's devalued its currency, India's domestic trade also suffered because, see, when Chinese devalued their currency, their products became more competitive in the export market, whereas India's products appeared to be expensive, similar products. So on that front, we suffered. The second aspect is, when Chinese devalued their currency, their exports to India, that is India's import from China, appeared to be very attractive, affecting the domestic manufacturers of the same products. To quote one example, steel. Steel industry in India suffered heavily. Many of the steel banks, if you ask which is the most affected, in terms of loan recovery, everybody who lent it to steel industries have suffered. Infrastructure as a whole, but within that the steel industry, because that is the kind of, and the statistics reveal. I did not believe it when I read it. You need not believe it. Please cross-check it. China has produced steel in the last 2 years of a quantity which is more than the steel produced by Europe in the last 200 years. So, and it is being dumped everywhere. And you raise the import duty to make it unattractive to import. Therefore, you will be compelled to buy the domestic produced steel. The Chinese exporter is willing to reduce the price in such a way that it is more than the import duty levied by the other nation. That is the kind of scenario that is prevalent. Of course, now further levies and things are getting sorted out, but this is the challenge that is happening. And therefore, this is a Chinese slump. It will affect them, but it also affects those who are trading with them. Then comes the scenario. Asia is the bright spot or the emerging market, and in that China is slumping, and therefore which other nation is bound to dominate? And the finger points out to India, because look at the facts and figures. GDP growth is estimated at 7.5%, and FDI doubled in the last 1 year. That is December 14 to December 15. It doubled, and FDI in 15 sectors have been liberalized to ease, rationalize, and simplify the process of foreign investments. And the investment in infrastructure for the next 5 years is estimated to be $1 trillion equivalent. And the reforms on Startup India, Make India, Digital India, and Skill India are all on the anvil. And 100 smart cities initiatives. And therefore, gradually, and ease of doing business is the greatest disadvantage. India ranked 142nd nation out of 189 nations evaluated. We have slipped down or improved by 12 points. We are now 130th nation in the last 1 year's efforts, but the target is to come within the top 50. If that can happen, then things would dramatically change. But to things I'm able to feel personally. One is that earlier it looked like there was politics in economics. Now it looks like there is economics in politics. And another change I am able to see is, in the past, the India's curse appeared to be ignorance of the masses and indifference of the intellectuals. But in the recent past, we are able to see masses are no longer ignorant. The awareness is there. The awakening is happening slowly, gradually. Similarly, intellectuals, though they are not directly entering politics, the political system, the government machinery is roping in by outsourcing or on contract basis or by appointing intellectuals in the society, the best in the society, and putting them in appropriate positions and slots, so that their involvement can change the way things are happening for good, for efficiency, transparency, accountability, and operational improvement. So that is another welcome thing, and opportunities are galore. In fact, to put it in a nutshell, 3 T's, I would say, are very critical for India to shape up into a developed economy. The first is the treasure. Of course, treasure, what I mean is the capital infusion, both in terms of domestic saving, capital formation and distribution to productive channels, and also the foreign direct investment and FII inflow and all that. So overall, capital and reserve, how it piles up or strengthens and is effectively used. So treasure. The second is the talent, which means that human resources is very critical in all these segments to produce the best, to give the best. And innovation is the need of the hour, so the premium talent has to be encouraged. R&D, results will help you to scale and surmount these challenges that you are going to encounter, and also to create systems that are required for the changing environment. So human resources, talent. And the third one is technology. How are we going to use the technology to handle or face the challenges of the future? So these are the 3 things I perceive, and adequate time and effort and the allocations are being given budget after budget, but more particularly in the last budget for this purpose. Then the statistics. Are we merely imagining things, or on the ground reality, whether there are concrete results that give us this hope or validate this kind of a confidence? So I just took the list of, because there are many negatives, there are many adverse factors amidst the Indian evolution in the present context. But are there any positives? Yes, these are the positives that give us enormous amount of hope and confidence. And in fact, in terms of electricity, the power ministry is promising 24/7 few years down the line, and it is also being demonstrated by the generation going up predominantly on thermal power, followed by hydro, and then to a smaller extent nuclear. And of course, the infrastructure investment is getting accelerated. In terms of road projects, 2015 experienced 16.5 kilometers per day being laid. And the target for this year, 2016, fiscal is 46 kilometers per day. And the last item, in this slide, turnaround time in ports, which is very essential. Construction of new berths in major ports, modernization has happened, and deepening of channels and berths is happening to accommodate bigger vessels, more number of vessels. And rail and road connectivity to the port, so that the cargo gets evacuated faster on a turnaround without blocking the space. So all these things are quite impressive. And economists would say there have been 3 revolutions before, industrial revolutions, one in 1784, next in 1870 and 1969. And is this the present watershed year or the critical year 2016-17 that will mark the commencement or beginning of the fourth industrial revolution in terms of cyber physical systems? Actually, it is interesting how human interface may be eliminated in many of the things that are being done. You know, the cyber physical systems called CPS first evolved from mechatronic devices augmented with communication capabilities and connectivity. A CPS is therefore a system composed of physical entities, such mechanisms controlled and monitored by computer-based algorithms. And these are already being introduced in aerospace, automotive, chemical processes, civil infrastructure, energy, healthcare, manufacturing, transportation, entertainment, and consumer appliances. And I can give two standing examples. I mean, there are many examples, but two examples. One is the distributed robo garden at MIT, in which a team of robots tend a garden of tomato plants. And another example is the MIT's ongoing cartel project, where a fleet of taxis work by collecting real-time traffic information in the Boston area. Together with historical data, this information is then used for calculating fastest routes for a given time of the day. So this revolution can make a significant impact on the emerging economies, and I'm confident that the world global economy is going to emerge out stronger, more with the financial systems more resilient, with the lessons learned from the past, and there India's contribution is going to be phenomenal. And you know, I'm confident that there is no problem which cannot find a solution, no failure which cannot be converted into a success, and no challenge which cannot be converted into an opportunity. And challenges are given only to those who have the ability to handle them. And I think India has enough ability to handle these challenges. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, I congratulate Nimish and his team for successfully hosting this conference, living up to the illustrious past chairman of Dubai chapter. And thank you very much for the opportunity. My time is up.